The snow fell thick and silent the night Zelda Barnes collapsed on the wooden porch of the ranch house, her frozen fingers still clutching a crumpled letter that promised a new life in Colorado territory. Jacob Xavier had been checking the horses in the barn when he heard the unfamiliar sound of footsteps crunching through the deep snow. Living 20 miles outside Cannon City, Colorado, in the winter of 1878, unexpected visitors were rare and usually meant trouble. He grabbed his lantern and stepped out into the bitter cold, his breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. The December wind howled across the open plains, carrying with it the promise of a brutal blizzard. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him in the swirling snow. A dark shape lay crumpled on his porch, barely visible against the white backdrop. Jacob's heart seized in his chest as he ran forward, his boots slipping on the icy planks. The figure was a woman, dressed in clothing far too thin for this weather, her face pale as death itself. "Madam. Madam, can you hear me?" Jacob dropped to his knees beside her, quickly checking for signs of life. Her skin felt like ice beneath his calloused fingers, but he found a pulse, weak and thready. Without hesitation, he scooped her into his arms and carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind them to keep out the savage cold. The warmth of the cabin hit them like a wall. Jacob's home was modest but well-maintained. A single large room with a stone fireplace, a bed in one corner, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and shelves lined with supplies. He had built it himself 3 years ago when he first claimed this land, hoping someday to fill it with a family. That dream had seemed distant until this very moment. He laid the woman on his bed, quickly stoking the fire until flames roared in the hearth. Her lips had taken on a bluish tinge, and her breathing came in shallow gasps. Jacob had seen frostbite before, had lost a friend to exposure during a winter cattle drive years back. He knew he had to work fast. "Stay with me," he murmured, pulling off her frozen shoes and stockings. Her feet were dangerously cold but not yet blackened with frostbite. Small mercies. He wrapped them in soft flannel, then began chafing her hands between his own, trying to restore circulation. Her fingers were slender and elegant, the hands of someone who had not spent their life in hard labor. As he worked, a piece of paper fluttered from her coat pocket to the floor. Jacob picked it up, unfolding it carefully. His own handwriting stared back at him, the letter he had sent 4 months ago through the mail-order bride agency in St. Louis. But this letter was addressed to a Miss Catherine Morrison, not to anyone named Zelda. Confusion clouded his mind until he noticed another paper tucked into her coat, this one more recent. It was a telegram from the agency, informing Miss Zelda Barnes that Miss Morrison had fallen ill and could not make the journey, but that Miss Barnes had agreed to take her place, honoring the contract. The telegram was dated 5 days ago. 5 days. She had been traveling for 5 days to reach him, through one of the worst early winter storms Colorado had seen in years. The stagecoach must have left her at the bottom of his road, unable or unwilling to bring her the final 2 miles to his ranch. She had walked through the blizzard alone to honor a commitment made by someone else. "You foolish, brave woman," Jacob whispered, continuing to warm her hands. "You could have died out there." As if in response to his voice, her eyelids fluttered. Jacob found himself holding his breath, watching as she fought her way back to consciousness. Her eyes opened slowly, revealing irises the color of warm honey. For a moment, she stared at him in confusion, her gaze unfocused. "Where?" Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Easy now," Jacob said softly. "You fainted in the snow at my doorstep, but you are safe now." "Jacob Xavier?" she asked, her voice gaining a bit of strength. "That is me. And you are Zelda Barnes, unless I miss my guess." She nodded slightly, wincing at the movement. The cold. I could not feel anything anymore. I thought I would die before I found the house. You nearly did. Jacob pulled another blanket over her, tucking it around her shoulders. But you are already home. You just need to rest and get warm. The words seemed to affect her deeply. Tears welled in her eyes, sliding down her pale cheeks. Home, she repeated, as if testing the word on her tongue. I have not had a home in so long. Jacob felt something shift in his chest, a protective instinct so strong it surprised him. This woman had risked everything to come to him, to honor a contract she had not even made. The least he could do was make sure she survived the night. Over the next few hours, he stayed by her side, monitoring her condition. He heated broth from his dinner and coaxed her to drink it, spoonfuls at a time. Color slowly returned to her cheeks, and her breathing steadied. As dawn approached and the storm outside began to calm, Jacob finally allowed himself to relax slightly. "Why did you come?" he asked quietly. "The telegram said Catherine Morrison could not make the journey. You could have simply notified me. You did not have to take her place." Zelda's eyes met his, and he saw a depth of sadness there that spoke of losses he could only imagine. "Catherine was my friend," she said. "We lived in the same boarding house in St. Louis. When she fell ill with pneumonia, I promised I would make sure you received word. But then I thought about it. I had nothing keeping me in St. Louis. No family, no prospects. Catherine had shown me your letters. You seemed like a good man, an honest man. I decided that perhaps fate was giving me a chance at a new life. So you traveled through a blizzard without proper clothing or supplies." Jacob could not keep the concern from his voice. "I had proper clothing," Zelda protested weakly. "But my bag was stolen at the last stage stop. Everything I owned was in that bag. I had only the clothes on my back and the letter. The driver said he would not wait, that the storm was coming and he had to reach Cannon City before dark. He left me at the bottom of your road with directions to walk the rest of the way." She closed her eyes, exhaustion evident in every line of her face. "I am sorry. You expected Catherine, someone you had been corresponding with. Instead, you got me." "I expected a mail-order bride," Jacob said firmly. "Someone willing to build a life with me in this harsh land. Someone brave enough to face the challenges that come with frontier living. Seems to me you have already proven yourself braver than most." A small smile touched her lips. "You are kind to say so. I am saying the truth." Jacob stood, moving to the stove to heat more broth. "Now rest. When you are stronger, we will talk about the future. But for now, you need to heal." Zelda slept for most of the next 2 days, waking only to eat and take care of necessities. Jacob moved his bedroll to the floor near the fire, giving her privacy and comfort. He spent the time doing his usual chores, feeding the horses and cattle, repairing a broken fence post, checking his traps. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed into a frozen wonderland. 3 feet of snow covered everything, pristine and beautiful in the weak winter sunlight. On the 3rd morning, he returned from the barn to find Zelda sitting up in bed, looking much recovered. Her honey-colored eyes were clear and alert, taking in every detail of the cabin that would be her home. "Good morning," Jacob said, stomping snow from his boots. "It is good to see you looking better." "I feel better," Zelda admitted, "though I confess I am embarrassed by all the trouble I have caused you." "No trouble." Jacob hung his coat on a peg by the door. "Are you hungry?" "I have eggs from the chickens. I could eat." She pushed back the blankets, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. She wore one of Jacob's clean shirts, which hung nearly to her knees. Her own dress had been soaked through and was hanging by the fire to dry. Jacob busied himself preparing breakfast, acutely aware of her presence. In the 3 years since he had left Kansas to claim this land, he had grown accustomed to solitude. Having another person in his space felt strange, but not unpleasant. He found himself wanting to know everything about her, the woman brave enough to walk through a blizzard to honor someone else's promise. They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the scrape of forks on tin plates. Finally, Zelda set down her fork and looked at him directly. "We should discuss terms," she said quietly. "I know you had an arrangement with Catherine. I do not expect you to honor that arrangement with me if you do not wish to. I can work to earn my passage back to St. Louis once the weather clears." Jacob considered his words carefully. "What kind of arrangement did you think I had with Catherine?" "Marriage," Zelda said simply. "You were looking for a wife. She was looking for a husband and a home. It seemed a fair exchange. And you, what are you looking for?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She was silent for a long moment, staring down at her hands. "Honestly, I am looking for a place to belong. My parents died of cholera when I was 16. I have been on my own since then, working as a seamstress, living in boarding houses, moving from city to city looking for work. I am tired of being alone. I am tired of having no one to care if I live or die." She looked up at him, vulnerability clear in her expression. "Catherine used to read me your letters. You wrote about this land, about building something lasting. You wrote about wanting a partner, not just a servant. That appealed to me more than I can say." "I meant every word," Jacob said. "I have this land, these animals, this house. But a ranch is not meant to be run by one person, and a house is not a home without someone to share it with." He paused, choosing his next words with care. "I will be honest with you, Zelda. I do not know you, you do not know me. We are strangers. But I believe we could build something good here if we are both willing to try. You would still marry me, even though I am not who you expected." "Catherine seemed like a nice woman from her letters," Jacob acknowledged. "But you are the one who walked through a blizzard to get here. You are the one sitting at my table. If you are willing, I would like to go ahead with the arrangement. We can travel to Cannon City when the roads clear and speak to the preacher there." Relief flooded Zelda's face, so profound it made Jacob's chest tighten. How desperate had she been to risk death for the chance at a new life? "I am willing," she said softly. "More than willing. Thank you, Jacob." "Thank me after you have lived through a Colorado winter," Jacob said with a slight smile. "You might change your mind." Over the following weeks, Jacob and Zelda settled into a cautious routine. The deep snows kept them close to the ranch, giving them time to learn about each other without the pressure of an immediate wedding. Jacob taught Zelda how to care for the chickens and how to milk the 2 cows he kept. She proved a quick learner, unafraid of hard work despite her small stature and city upbringing. In turn, Zelda brought order to the cabin. She mended Jacob's worn clothes with neat, precise stitches, her seamstress training evident in every repair. She organized his supplies, cooked meals that were far more elaborate than the simple fare he had been surviving on, and somehow made the rough cabin feel warmer, more welcoming. They talked during the long evenings, sharing stories of their pasts. Jacob told her about growing up in Missouri, the youngest of 4 sons. His father had been a farmer, struggling to make ends meet on depleted soil. When Jacob turned 18 in 1869, he had headed west, working cattle drives and odd jobs until he had enough money to claim his own land under the Homestead Act. He had chosen this spot in Colorado Territory for its good water and grazing, building his herd slowly but steadily. Zelda's story was sadder. Her parents had run a small dry goods store in Illinois. When cholera swept through their town in 1872, they had both succumbed within days of each other. At 16, Zelda had been left with nothing, The store's debts consumed what little they owned. She had learned to sew and spent the next 6 years moving from town to town, following rumors of work, barely scraping by. I had almost given up, she confessed one night as they sat by the fire. I was so tired of fighting. When Catherine got the pneumonia and could not travel, I saw it as a sign. One last chance to find something better. I am glad you took that chance, Jacob said. He found himself watching her more and more these days, noticing the way firelight caught in her dark brown hair, the grace of her movements as she worked, the soft sound of her humming as she mended his shirts. She looked up at him, meeting his gaze. Something passed between them, an awareness that this was becoming more than just a practical arrangement. Jacob felt his heart begin to beat faster. Zelda's cheeks flushed pink, but she did not look away. "So am I," she whispered. The moment was broken by a loud banging on the door. Jacob jumped to his feet, his hand instinctively going to the rifle mounted above the fireplace. Visitors were rare enough in good weather. In the middle of winter, they were almost unheard of. "Xavier, you in there?" A familiar voice called through the door. Jacob relaxed, recognizing the voice of Samuel Porter, his nearest neighbor who lived 5 miles to the east. He opened the door to find Samuel standing on the porch, covered in snow, leading an exhausted-looking horse. "Sam, what are you doing out in this weather?" "Needed to warn folks," Samuel said, stepping inside gratefully. He stopped short when he saw Zelda, surprise evident on his weathered face. "Oh, pardon me, madam, did not know Jacob had company." "This is Zelda Barnes," Jacob said. "My intended. Zelda, this is Samuel Porter." "Pleased to meet you," Zelda said, rising to fetch a cup of coffee for their unexpected guest. Samuel accepted the coffee gratefully, warming his hands on the tin cup. "Your intended? Well, congratulations are in order, but I am afraid I have some troubling news. There has been a pack of wolves causing problems, coming down from the mountains because of the deep snow. They are desperate and hungry. Lost 2 calves last night, and the Johnsons lost a horse. We are organizing a hunt, planning to track them tomorrow if the weather holds." Jacob's expression grew serious. Wolves were a constant threat on the frontier, but a desperate pack in winter could be truly dangerous. "I will come," he said immediately. "Good man. We are meeting at dawn at the Johnson place." Samuel drained his coffee and stood. "I need to get home before dark. But I wanted to make sure you knew. Keep your stock close and your rifle loaded." After Samuel left, Jacob spent the rest of the evening checking his weapons and preparing for the hunt. Zelda watched him with worried eyes but said nothing until he sat down for a late supper. "Is it dangerous?" she asked quietly. "Hunting wolves? It can be," Jacob admitted. "But it is necessary. If we do not thin their numbers, they will keep attacking livestock. Some packs have been known to go after people if they get desperate enough." "Please be careful," Zelda said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. It was the first time she had initiated physical contact, and the warmth of her fingers sent a jolt through Jacob. "I will," he promised, turning his hand to squeeze hers gently. "I have something to come back to now." The wolf hunt the next day was long and exhausting. Jacob and 5 other ranchers tracked the pack through the deep snow, finally cornering them in a rocky ravine 10 miles from the Johnson ranch. The fight was brief but fierce. In the end, they killed 4 wolves, and the rest of the pack scattered, likely to move on to easier hunting grounds. Jacob returned home just as darkness was falling, tired and cold but uninjured. He found Zelda waiting by the window, and the relief on her face when she saw him stirred something deep in his chest. "Thank God," she breathed, rushing to help him remove his snow-covered coat. "I was so worried." "I told you I would come back," Jacob said, catching her hands in his. "Zelda, I need to say something." She looked up at him, her honey-colored eyes wide. "When I sent that letter to the bride agency, I was looking for a practical arrangement, someone to help run the ranch, to share the work and the hardships. I was not expecting." He paused, searching for the right words. "I was not expecting to feel this way. These past weeks with you have been the happiest I can remember. You are not just a stranger honoring someone else's contract. You are becoming dear to me." Tears sparkled in Zelda's eyes. "I feel the same way," she whispered. "I was so afraid when you left this morning, afraid something would happen to you and I would lose what we are building together. Jacob, I think I am falling in love with you." The confession hung in the air between them, fragile and precious. Jacob lifted his hands to cup her face, his calloused thumbs brushing away her tears. "Then we should not wait any longer," he said. "Tomorrow, if the weather holds, we will go to Cannon City and find that preacher. I want you to be my wife, Zelda. Not because of a contract or an arrangement, but because I cannot imagine my life without you now." "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, Jacob, tomorrow." He kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that spoke of promise and new beginnings. Zelda leaned into him, her arms wrapping around his neck, and for a long moment the harsh world outside ceased to exist. The journey to Cannon City the next day was cold but clear. The main road had been traveled enough that the snow was packed down, making passage possible. Jacob hitched his 2 horses to the small wagon he used for supply runs, making a comfortable seat for Zelda with blankets and furs. She sat close beside him, and he found himself acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched. Cannon City, in December of 1878, was a bustling town, despite the winter weather. The discovery of coal and the recent arrival of the railroad had transformed it from a sleepy settlement into a growing hub of commerce. The main street was lined with wooden buildings, their false fronts painted with advertisements for dry goods, hardware, and various services. Jacob guided the wagon to the small white church at the edge of town. Reverend Thomas Mitchell was a kindly man in his 50s who had married most of the couples in the area over the past decade. He welcomed them warmly, showing no surprise at their request for an immediate ceremony. "Love does not wait for spring," he said with a knowing smile. "Let me fetch my wife to serve as witness." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Standing in the small church with winter sunlight streaming through the windows, Jacob and Zelda exchanged vows that bound them together before God and the law. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob kissed his bride with a tenderness that made even the practical Mrs. Mitchell dab at her eyes. They spent the rest of the day in Cannon City, celebrating their marriage with a meal at the hotel restaurant and purchasing supplies they would need. Jacob also insisted on buying Zelda several new dresses and a heavy wool coat, determined that she would never again face the cold unprepared. As they loaded the wagon for the journey home, Jacob noticed a group of men gathered outside the sheriff's office, their voices raised in angry discussion. He recognized several local ranchers, including Samuel Porter. "Wait here," he told Zelda, helping her into the wagon before walking over to investigate. "What is going on?" he asked Samuel. "Trouble," Samuel replied grimly. "You know the Harrison Ranch about 30 miles north of here," Jacob nodded. He had met Frank Harrison a few times, a good man trying to build a life for his family. "Raiders hit them 2 nights ago," Samuel continued. "Took all their horses, burned their barn. Frank and his wife are fine, but they are saying it was an organized gang, not just drifters. Sheriff is putting together a posse to track them." Jacob felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Organized raiders were a serious threat. How many men? Maybe a dozen. They have been hitting ranches across 3 counties, always in winter when folks are most vulnerable. Sheriff thinks they have a hideout somewhere in the mountains. I would volunteer for the posse, Jacob said, but I just got married this morning. I need to get my wife home before dark. Samuel's weathered face broke into a grin. You married that pretty lady. Congratulations. No, you get her home safe. There are enough men here, but keep your eyes open and your rifle close. If they are working this area, your ranch could be a target. Jacob thanked him for the warning and returned to the wagon, his mind troubled. He did not want to frighten Zelda on their wedding day, but she deserved to know the truth. As they headed out of town, he told her about the raiders. To her credit, she did not panic. Instead, she listened carefully, asked intelligent questions about their defenses, and then surprised him by revealing she knew how to shoot. My father taught me, she explained. He said every person living on the frontier should know how to defend themselves. I am not an expert, but I can hit what I aim at. You continue to amaze me, Mrs. Xavier, Jacob said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. She smiled, leaning into his embrace. Mrs. Xavier, she repeated softly. I like the sound of that. They reached the ranch just as the sun was setting, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Jacob unhitched the horses and secured them in the barn while Zelda carried their purchases into the cabin. When he came inside, stamping snow from his boots, he found she had lit every lamp they owned, filling the space with warm, golden light. She had also changed into one of the new dresses, a deep blue that brought out the color in her eyes. Welcome home, husband, she said softly. Jacob closed the door behind him, his heart full to bursting. Welcome home, wife. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, a claiming and a promise all at once. Jacob was careful with her, mindful of her innocence, and Zelda responded with a passion that surprised them both. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, listening to the wind howl outside their warm sanctuary. Are you happy? Jacob asked, stroking her hair. Happier than I ever imagined I could be, Zelda murmured against his chest. When I was walking through that blizzard, I thought I was going to die. I remember thinking it was a foolish way to end, freezing to death for a man I had never met. But then you found me. You saved me. You gave me a home and a future. How could I not be happy? I am the lucky one, Jacob insisted. You walked through a blizzard for the chance at something better. That takes courage most people never have. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret that walk. The winter months passed in a blur of work and quiet joy. Jacob taught Zelda the rhythms of ranch life, and she adapted with a determination that impressed him daily. She learned to read the weather, to understand the moods of the animals, to anticipate what needed to be done before he had to ask. Together, they were building something more than just a working ranch. They were building a true partnership. The threat of the raiders hung over the area like a dark cloud. 2 more ranches were hit in January, and the sheriff's posse had yet to catch the perpetrators. Jacob took precautions, bringing the horses into the barn at night and keeping his rifle always within reach. He taught Zelda his emergency signals, practiced shooting with her until she could reliably hit a target at 30 yards. One bitterly cold night in early February, Jacob was awakened by the sound of the horses screaming in fear. He was out of bed in an instant, grabbing his rifle and boots. Stay inside, he ordered Zelda. Bar the door behind me and do not open it unless you hear my voice. Be careful, she whispered, fear clear in her voice. Jacob slipped out into the frozen darkness, moving as quietly as he could toward the barn. The horses were in a frenzy, their cries piercing the night. As he got closer, he saw the dark shapes of men trying to force open the barn door. Get away from there, Jacob shouted, raising his rifle. The response was immediate. Gunfire erupted, bullets whining past his head. Jacob dropped and rolled, returning fire. He hit one man, saw him fall, but there were at least 5 others, too many for him to face alone in the open. He heard the cabin door open and his heart seized with terror. Zelda, no, get back inside. But Zelda had positioned herself in the doorway, using the frame for cover, and she began firing methodically at the raiders. Her shots were well aimed, forcing the attackers to scatter and seek cover. The distraction gave Jacob time to reach the corner of the barn, where he had a better angle. The firefight lasted only a few minutes but felt like hours. When the smoke cleared, 2 raiders lay dead, and the rest had fled into the darkness, abandoning their attempt to steal the horses. Jacob waited, making sure they were truly gone before rushing back to the cabin. Zelda was standing in the doorway, the rifle still in her hands, shaking like a leaf. Jacob pulled her inside, barring the door behind them, and took the weapon from her trembling fingers. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently, checking her over for injuries. "No," she managed, her voice thin. "Are you?" "I am fine, thanks to you." Jacob pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "You saved our horses, maybe saved my life, but God, Zelda, you could have been killed." "So could you," she replied, her face buried in his chest. "I could not just hide while you faced them alone." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other, letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. When Jacob's heartbeat finally slowed to normal, he guided Zelda back to bed, though neither of them slept much for the rest of the night. At dawn, Jacob rode to Samuel Porter's ranch to report the attack. By afternoon, every rancher in the area knew that the raiders had finally made a mistake. They had left behind 2 bodies, and one of the dead men was recognized as a known outlaw from Kansas with a price on his head. The sheriff arrived 2 days later with a larger posse, following the trail the surviving raiders had left in their hasty retreat. This time, they tracked the gang to their hideout, an abandoned mining camp in the mountains. In the ensuing confrontation, the gang was finally broken. Some were captured, others killed, and the rest scattered to the winds. When the sheriff came by the ranch to inform them that the threat was over, Jacob felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He could finally relax, could finally focus on building their life without constantly watching over his shoulder. Spring came gradually to Colorado, the snow melting slowly to reveal the brown grass beneath. Jacob and Zelda worked side by side, repairing winter damage to fences, preparing the fields for planting, caring for the newborn calves. The days were long and exhausting, but they fell into bed each night satisfied, curled together as naturally as breathing. In April, Zelda began feeling ill in the mornings. At first, they thought it was something she ate, but when it persisted for over a week, understanding began to dawn. Jacob rode to Cannon City and convinced the doctor there to make a house call. Dr. Harrison was a cheerful man who examined Zelda thoroughly before delivering his verdict with a broad smile. "Congratulations, Mrs. Xavier. You are going to have a baby. I would estimate it will arrive sometime in late October or early November." The news left them both stunned. They had been married only 4 months, but of course it made sense. Jacob found himself grinning like a fool, unable to contain his joy. Zelda looked dazed but happy, one hand pressed to her still flat stomach. "A baby," she whispered after the doctor left. "Jacob, we are going to have a baby." "We are going to need a bigger house," Jacob said, already planning in his mind. "And a proper bedroom so the baby's crying does not keep us awake all night. I can add on to the cabin, maybe build a second room." "We have time," Zelda laughed, catching his hands. "I have months yet before the baby comes." But Jacob was already consumed with preparations. Over the following weeks, he worked with almost frantic energy, adding a bedroom to the cabin and building a sturdy cradle from pine wood he cut himself. He smoothed it until there were no splinters, wanting everything perfect for his child. Zelda watched his efforts with affection and amusement, continuing her own work around the ranch despite the pregnancy. She felt well after the morning sickness passed, strong and capable. Together, they planted a kitchen garden, and Zelda took particular joy in tending the growing vegetables. Samuel Porter and his wife Emily became regular visitors, Emily full of advice for the expectant mother. Other neighbors stopped by as well, the community of isolated ranchers pulling together to support one of their own. Zelda formed friendships with the other ranch wives, finding a sense of belonging she had never experienced in her lonely years in the city. Summer brought its own challenges. A dry spell threatened the water supply, and Jacob spent long days digging a new well to supplement their existing one. A mountain lion took one of their calves, and Jacob had to track and kill it before it did more damage. But through it all, Zelda was beside him, a partner in every sense of the word. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch Jacob had expanded, watching the sun set over the mountains, talking about their future. Jacob would rest his hand on Zelda's growing belly, feeling their child move beneath his palm, and think about how close he had come to losing all of this before it even began. "What are you thinking about?" Zelda asked one evening, noticing his pensive expression. "About the night you arrived," Jacob said. "If I had been just 5 minutes later checking the barn, if I had not heard your footsteps in the snow, if you had collapsed just a little farther from the house where I might not have seen you." "But you did hear me," Zelda interrupted gently. "You found me, you saved me. Everything that has happened since that night was meant to be." "Do you ever regret it?" Jacob asked. "This life is hard. You work from dawn to dusk. We are isolated out here, miles from town. You could have had an easier life elsewhere." Zelda turned to face him fully, taking his hands in hers. "Jacob Xavier, you listen to me. I have never been happier than I am right now. I have a home. I have a husband who loves me. I have a baby growing inside me. I have friends and a community that accepts me. This life you have given me is worth every hardship, every moment of hard work. I would walk through that blizzard again in a heartbeat if it meant ending up here with you." Jacob pulled her close, kissing her with all the love and gratitude in his heart. "I love you, Zelda Xavier. More than I knew it was possible to love another person." "I love you too," she whispered against his lips, "now and always." October arrived with a dusting of early snow, and Zelda's time drew near. Emily Porter came to stay at the ranch for the final 2 weeks, her experienced presence a comfort to both Jacob and Zelda. When the labor pains began on a crisp morning, Emily took charge, sending Jacob to fetch the doctor while she helped Zelda prepare. Jacob rode harder than he ever had in his life, reaching Cannon City in record time. Dr. Harrison gathered his supplies and followed Jacob back to the ranch, arriving just as Zelda's labor intensified. The next several hours were the longest of Jacob's life. He paced outside the bedroom door, listening to Zelda's cries, feeling helpless and terrified. Samuel Porter had ridden over when he saw Jacob racing past, and he sat with the younger man, offering quiet support. Finally, just as the sun was setting, Jacob heard a new sound. The thin, outraged wail of a newborn baby. His heart nearly stopped. The bedroom door opened and Emily emerged with a tired but triumphant smile. "You have a son, Jacob, a healthy boy, and Zelda did wonderfully. She is tired but fine." Jacob pushed past her into the bedroom, his eyes immediately finding his wife. Zelda was propped up in bed, her hair damp with sweat, looking exhausted but radiant. In her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, was the smallest person Jacob had ever seen. "Come meet your son," Zelda said softly. Jacob approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, looking down at the tiny face of his child. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with unfocused dark blue eyes, his tiny fist waving in the air. "He is perfect," Jacob whispered, touching one impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers immediately wrapped around his finger, gripping with surprising strength. "Just perfect, like his mother." "What should we name him?" Zelda asked. They had discussed names for weeks without deciding. But now, looking at his son, Jacob knew exactly what felt right. "Thomas," he said. "Thomas Samuel Xavier, after the Reverend who married us and Samuel who has been such a good friend." "Thomas," Zelda repeated, smiling down at the baby. "Yes, that is perfect." Dr. Harrison checked them both over, pronouncing mother and baby healthy, before departing with Samuel and Emily. Alone with his new family, Jacob felt overwhelmed with emotion. Just a year ago, he had been living alone in this cabin, lonely and wondering if he had made a mistake coming to this harsh land. Now he had a wife he adored and a son. He had a family. "Thank you," he said to Zelda, kissing her forehead gently. "For what?" "For walking through that blizzard. For being brave enough to come to a stranger. For giving me this life." Zelda shifted baby Thomas so she could take Jacob's hand. "We gave each other this life," she corrected. "You saved me that night, but I think maybe I saved you too. We saved each other." Jacob could not argue with that. He stretched out carefully beside his wife and new son, forming a protective circle around them with his body. Outside, the first snow of winter was beginning to fall, but inside, the cabin was warm and filled with love. The first year of Thomas's life flew by in a blur of sleepless nights and joyful discoveries. Jacob found himself amazed by every milestone, every smile, every new sound the baby made. Zelda bloomed as a mother, finding reserves of patience and tenderness she had not known she possessed. The ranch continued to prosper. Jacob's herd grew, and he was able to hire a young man named Peter Williams to help with the heavy work. This gave him more time to spend with his family, something he treasured above all else. When Thomas was 14 months old, Zelda announced she was expecting again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect. Their daughter arrived on a warm June evening in 1880, coming into the world so quickly that Dr. Harrison almost did not make it in time. They named her Rose Emily Xavier, after no one in particular, simply because Zelda had always loved roses and Emily Porter had become like a sister to her. Rose was a calm baby, so different from her energetic brother, and she quickly wrapped her father around her tiny finger. Life fell into a comfortable rhythm. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and Jacob and Zelda's love deepened with each passing year. They faced challenges together: drought years and harsh winters, illnesses and injuries, the constant work of frontier life. But they also experienced profound joys. Watching their children take their first steps, teaching Thomas to ride a horse, picking wildflowers with Rose, sitting together on the porch in the evenings after the children were asleep. In 1884, Colorado achieved statehood, and Cannon City celebrated with a 3-day festival. Jacob took his family to town for the festivities, proud to show off his thriving children and beautiful wife. They watched fireworks light up the night sky, and Jacob held Zelda close, remembering the desperate woman who had collapsed in the snow 6 years earlier. "We have come a long way," he murmured into her hair. "We have," Zelda agreed, watching Thomas chase Rose through the crowd with protective eyes. "And we have so much farther to go." In 1886, Zelda gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named William and Robert. The cabin that had once seemed so spacious was now bursting at the seams with noise and life. Jacob built an addition, creating a proper house with separate bedrooms and a large kitchen. He also hired another hand, as the ranch now ran over 300 head of cattle. Samuel Porter joked that Jacob Xavier was building an empire, and maybe he was. But it was not the land or the cattle that mattered to Jacob. It was the family he shared it with, the legacy he was building for his children. Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved working with the horses. Rose was gentle and kind, always bringing home injured animals for her mother to nurse back to health. The twins were a tornado of energy and mischief, keeping Zelda constantly on her toes. Through it all, Jacob and Zelda's partnership never wavered. They still found time for each other, still stole quiet moments alone when they could. Their love had matured from those first passionate days into something deeper and more enduring. They knew each other's thoughts before they were spoken, moved in sync through their daily work, trusted each other completely. In the spring of 1888, Jacob was working on repairing the barn roof when he saw a wagon approaching on the road. Visitors were more common now than they had been in the early years, but he still felt a flicker of curiosity about who might be coming. As the wagon drew closer, he recognized the driver as Reverend Mitchell from Cannon City. The Reverend waved cheerfully, guiding his horse into the yard. "Reverend," Jacob climbed down from the roof, brushing off his hands. "This is a surprise. What brings you all the way out here?" "I am making rounds to all my parishioners," Reverend Mitchell explained, climbing down from the wagon with a slight groan. His hair had gone completely white in the decade since he had married Jacob and Zelda, but his smile was still warm. "Thought I would check on the Xavier family. I hear you have quite a brood now." "4 children," Jacob confirmed proudly. "Would you like to come in? Zelda will want to see you, and you should stay for dinner." Over the meal, surrounded by the cheerful chaos of his family, Reverend Mitchell smiled with satisfaction. "You know," he said to Jacob and Zelda, "I have married a lot of couples over the years. Some marriages work out, some do not. But I can honestly say I have never seen two people more perfectly suited to each other than you two." "We were lucky," Jacob said, reaching for Zelda's hand across the table. "It was not luck," the Reverend corrected gently. "It was faith. Faith that brought Zelda through that blizzard. Faith that helped you both build this life together. And love, of course. Always love." After the Reverend left, Jacob and Zelda stood on the porch watching the sun set. Thomas was in the barn checking on a mare about to foal. Rose was reading to the twins, her patient voice carrying through the open window. The life they had built together spread out around them, solid and real and full of promise. "Are you happy?" Jacob asked, the same question he had asked on their wedding night so many years ago. Zelda leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder in a gesture so familiar it felt like coming home. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she said. "When I think about that girl who walked through the blizzard, so desperate and alone, I barely recognize her. You gave me everything, Jacob. A home, a family, a purpose. You gave me love." "We gave each other love," Jacob corrected, echoing her words from years ago. "And we will keep giving it every day for the rest of our lives." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Thomas grew into a fine young man, eventually marrying a neighboring rancher's daughter and starting his own spread with his father's help. Rose became a teacher in Cannon City, though she came home often to visit. The twins, inseparable as always, worked the ranch alongside Jacob, learning every aspect of the business. In 1895, Zelda surprised everyone by announcing she was expecting again at the age of 41. The pregnancy was harder than the others had been, and Jacob worried constantly. But Zelda was strong, and in the spring of 1896, she gave birth to their last child, a girl they named Grace. Grace's arrival seemed to complete their family in a way none of them had anticipated. She was a happy baby who grew into a joyful child, beloved by her much older siblings and utterly adored by her parents. Jacob and Zelda were grandparents now, Thomas and his wife having blessed them with 2 grandchildren. The house that Jacob had built and expanded over the years was often filled with 3 generations, laughter and love echoing off the walls. On a cold December night in 1898, 20 years after Zelda had first arrived, Jacob and Zelda sat by the fire in the main room of their home. The children were all in bed and the house was quiet for once. Outside, snow was falling, thick and silent, just as it had that long-ago night. "Do you remember?" Jacob asked softly, watching the snow through the window. "Every moment," Zelda replied. She was 44 now, with silver threading through her dark hair, but to Jacob, she was as beautiful as the day he had first seen her. "I remember thinking I was going to die. I remember the cold, so cold I could not feel anything anymore, and then I remember warmth. Your voice telling me I was safe, that I was already home." "You were home," Jacob said, pulling her close. "From that very first moment you belonged here with me." "With you," Zelda echoed. She looked around the warm, comfortable room, at the home they had built together, at the life they had created. "Jacob, do you ever think about how different things could have been? If the storm had been worse, if you had not heard me, if I had not been brave enough to make that walk?" "All the time," Jacob admitted. "But that is not what happened. You were brave enough. I did hear you. We found each other against all odds and we built this beautiful life together." Zelda turned to face him fully, cupping his weathered face in her hands. At 62, Jacob still worked the ranch every day, though he let the twins handle more of the heavy labor now. His hair was completely gray, his face lined from years in the sun, but his dark eyes still held the same warmth and love they had shown that first night. "I love you, Jacob Xavier," Zelda said fiercely. "I have loved you from the moment you told me I was already home. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you, Zelda Xavier," Jacob replied, kissing her softly. "You are my heart, my home, my everything. Thank you for being brave enough to walk through that blizzard. Thank you for giving me this life." They sat together by the fire, watching the snow fall, hands intertwined as they had been for 20 years. Outside, the world was cold and harsh, but inside they were warm and safe and surrounded by the life they had built together. The ranch continued to thrive under Jacob's guidance and the strong backs of his sons. Thomas's own ranch was doing well, and he had expanded his herd significantly. Rose married a lawyer in Cannon City, giving Jacob and Zelda more grandchildren to dote on. The twins, now in their 20s, showed no signs of settling down, too busy enjoying their work and their freedom. And Grace, their surprise blessing, grew into a precocious girl who kept them all on their toes. In 1902, Jacob and Zelda celebrated their 24th anniversary. The whole family gathered at the ranch for a party that lasted 2 days. Neighbors came from miles around, the celebration growing into a community event. Everyone wanted to honor the couple who had become pillars of their small frontier society. Samuel Porter, now in his 70s, stood up during the dinner to make a toast. "I have known Jacob Xavier since he first came to this territory," he said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "He was young and determined, ready to build a life in this harsh land. But I worried about him, alone out here with nothing but cattle for company. Then one winter, a miracle happened. A brave woman walked through a blizzard to get to him, and everything changed. Jacob and Zelda, you have shown all of us what true partnership looks like. You have built not just a successful ranch, but a family and a legacy that will endure for generations. We are all better for knowing you. The crowd raised their glasses, voices joining in agreement. Jacob stood, pulling Zelda up beside him. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "But the truth is, I am the one who should be thanking you. This community welcomed my wife when she was a stranger. You supported us through hard times and celebrated with us during good times. We are not just neighbors out here. We are family." As the party continued into the night, Jacob and Zelda slipped away for a few moments alone. They walked to the top of a nearby hill, looking down at their ranch lit up with lanterns and full of people they loved. "We did well," Jacob said simply. "We did," Zelda agreed. "Better than I ever imagined possible." They stood together in comfortable silence, listening to the distant sounds of music and laughter. The moon was full, casting silver light across the snow-covered landscape. It was a scene almost identical to that night 24 years ago, and yet everything had changed. No regrets. Jacob asked. "Not a single one," Zelda said firmly. "You. Only that I did not find you sooner," Jacob replied, wrapping his arms around her. "But then, perhaps we found each other exactly when we were meant to. The years that followed were gentle ones." Jacob gradually handed over more responsibility for the ranch to the twins, though he still helped with the work. He could not imagine not working, not being part of the daily rhythm of ranch life. Zelda continued to manage the household with efficient grace, though she also took on less strenuous tasks, content to let Grace and the twins' eventual wives handle the heavier work. Grace grew into a beautiful young woman who inherited her mother's honey-colored eyes and her father's determination. Unlike her siblings, she had no interest in leaving the ranch. She loved the land as much as Jacob did, and he began teaching her everything he knew about managing the property. In 1908, tragedy struck when Samuel Porter passed away quietly in his sleep. His death hit the community hard, and especially Jacob, who had lost his closest friend. The funeral was well attended, and Jacob spoke of Samuel's kindness, his loyalty, his unwavering friendship over 30 years. That night, lying in bed beside Zelda, Jacob felt the weight of his own mortality for the first time. He was 71 years old, had lived a full and blessed life. But the thought of leaving Zelda, of not being there to watch his grandchildren grow, filled him with a profound sadness. "We all die eventually," Zelda said softly, sensing his thoughts as she always did. "But what matters is how we live, and you, Jacob Xavier, have lived a good life, a life full of love and purpose and joy." "So have you," Jacob replied, holding her close. "Promise me something. Anything. When my time comes, do not mourn too long. Remember the good times, remember the love, and live whatever years you have left to the fullest." "Only if you promise the same," Zelda countered. "If I go first, you keep living, keep loving our children and grandchildren. Keep working this land we built together." "I promise," Jacob said, though he could not imagine a world without her in it. But time is cruel and kind in equal measure. Jacob and Zelda were granted more years together, years filled with watching their family grow and thrive. Thomas took over management of the expanded ranch operations, proving himself a capable leader. Rose's children became regular visitors, bringing laughter and chaos to their grandparents' home. The twins finally settled down, both marrying in the same year and starting families of their own. And Grace, their youngest, remained at the main house, learning everything about ranch management from her father. In the spring of 1915, Jacob celebrated his 78th birthday. He was slower now, his joints stiff from decades of hard work, but his mind was still sharp, and his love for Zelda burned as bright as ever. They spent the warm evening on the porch, watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before. 37 years, Jacob mused. "It has been 37 years since you walked through that blizzard." Best walk I ever took, Zelda said with a smile. She was 71 now, her hair completely silver, her face lined with the marks of a life well lived. To Jacob, she was still the most beautiful woman in the world. I am glad you did not die that night, Jacob said seriously. I am glad I heard your footsteps in the snow. I am glad for every single day we have had together. As am I, Zelda replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. You saved my life that night, but you also gave me a reason to live. You gave me love, family, purpose. Everything I am, everything good in my life, started the moment you opened that door and found me. They sat in peaceful silence as darkness fell, comfortable with each other in a way only decades of marriage could bring. The house behind them was full of family, 3 generations living under the roof Jacob had built with his own hands. The land around them was thriving, well managed and productive. They had built something lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone. Grace found them there hours later, still sitting close together, hands clasped. She smiled at the sight of her parents, so clearly devoted to each other even after all these years. You two should come inside, she said gently. It is getting cold. In a minute, Jacob replied. We are just remembering. Grace left them alone, understanding that some moments were too precious to interrupt. Jacob and Zelda continued to sit, wrapped in memories and love, grateful for every moment fate had granted them. The winter of 1917 was harsh, the kind of brutal cold that Jacob remembered from his early years on the ranch. He was 80 years old now, and though he tried to maintain his usual routine, his body finally began to betray him. A cough that started in December lingered into January, settling deep in his chest. Zelda nursed him with fierce devotion, sitting by his bedside through long nights, refusing to leave him alone. The children took turns keeping vigil, and the house that had always been so full of life took on a hushed, worried quality. Dr. Harrison, now an old man himself, came weekly to check on Jacob. After one such visit in late January, he pulled Zelda aside. His heart is failing, he said gently. The cough is just a symptom. He is 80 years old, Zelda. He has lived a long, full life, but I do not think he has much time left. Zelda nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. She had known, of course. After nearly 40 years of marriage, she knew Jacob better than she knew herself. She could feel him slipping away, could see the weariness in his eyes even when he tried to hide it. That night, she climbed into bed beside him, something the children had been discouraging so she could rest in another room. But she needed to be close to him, needed to feel his warmth while she still could. I am dying, Jacob said quietly. It was not a question. Yes, Zelda replied, seeing no point in lying. I think you are. I am sorry, Jacob said, turning his head to look at her. Even now, with death approaching, his eyes held the same love they always had. I promised you a life together, and I am leaving you. You gave me a life together, Zelda corrected, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. 39 years, Jacob. You gave me 39 years of love and happiness. You gave me children and grandchildren. You gave me a home and a purpose. You have nothing to apologize for. I wish it could be longer, Jacob whispered. So do I, Zelda admitted, but I am grateful for every moment we had. You saved me, Jacob Xavier. You saved me that night in the snow, and you kept saving me every day after. I love you so much. I love you too, Jacob said. Promise me you will be okay. Promise me you will live whatever time you have left surrounded by our family, remembering the good times. I promise, Zelda said, even as her heart shattered. But you have to promise me something too. Anything. When you get wherever you are going, wait for me. I will find you again, just like I found you that night in the snow. Jacob smiled, reaching up to touch her face one last time. I will wait, he promised. I will wait forever if I have to." 2 days later, on a cold February morning, Jacob Xavier passed away peacefully in his sleep, his wife's hand clasped in his. He was 80 years old and had lived to see his children become successful adults, his grandchildren grow, and the ranch he had built become one of the most successful in the region. The funeral was held at the church in Cannon City, the same church where Jacob and Zelda had been married 4 decades earlier. The building was packed with people whose lives Jacob had touched over the years. Neighbors, friends, business associates, all came to pay their respects to a man who had lived with integrity and kindness. Zelda stood strong through the service, flanked by her 5 children. She did not break down, did not give in to the overwhelming grief that threatened to consume her. Jacob would not want her to fall apart, would want her to stay strong for their family. They buried him on the ranch, on the hill where he and Zelda had stood so many times, looking down at the life they had built together. The gravestone was simple. Jacob Xavier, 1837–1917, beloved husband, father, and friend. In the weeks that followed, Zelda moved through her days in a fog of grief. She had known losing Jacob would be hard, but she had not anticipated the sheer emptiness of life without him. For 40 years, he had been her constant companion, her partner in all things. Without him, she felt lost, her children worried about her, taking turns staying at the house to make sure she was eating and caring for herself. But Zelda was stronger than they gave her credit for. She had survived poverty and loneliness before meeting Jacob. She had walked through a blizzard on the slim hope of a better life. She would survive this too. Spring came, and with it, a renewal of purpose. Zelda threw herself into working with grace to manage the ranch, finding comfort in the familiar rhythms of the work she and Jacob had done together for so long. She spent time with her grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, making sure his memory stayed alive. At night, alone in the bed she had shared with Jacob for so many years, she would talk to him, telling him about her day, about the children and grandchildren, about the ranch. She found comfort in the one-sided conversations, in maintaining the connection they had shared. The years passed slowly. Zelda remained active and engaged with her family, but everyone could see that part of her was missing. She was waiting, patiently but certainly, to join Jacob wherever he had gone. In the fall of 1923, Zelda began to feel tired in a way that sleep could not remedy. She was 79 years old and had lived 6 years without Jacob, 6 years that felt both like an eternity and the blink of an eye. When Dr. Harrison confirmed that her heart was failing, she felt relief more than fear. She made her peace with her children, told them how proud she was of the lives they had built, how grateful she was for every moment they had given her. She updated her will, making sure the ranch would be properly divided among them, though Grace would maintain primary management. On a cold December night, almost exactly 45 years after she had first arrived at the ranch, Zelda Xavier lay in her bed, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. Outside, snow was falling, thick and silent, just as it had that long-ago night that changed her life forever. "Tell us the story," Grace asked softly, holding her mother's hand. "Tell us about the night you arrived." Zelda smiled, her voice weak but clear. "It was the coldest night I had ever experienced," she began. "I was so scared walking through that blizzard, thinking I would die in the snow. But I kept going, kept putting one foot in front of the other because I had faith that something better was waiting for me." She paused, gathering her strength. "And then I saw the house. I made it to the porch, and I remember thinking that at least I would die having tried. But then the door opened and your father was there. He carried me inside, warmed me, saved me, and he said the most beautiful thing I had ever heard." "What did he say?" one of the grandchildren asked, even though they had all heard this story dozens of times. "He said you are already home," Zelda replied, tears slipping down her weathered cheeks, "and he was right. From that moment on, I was home. With him, I was always home." Her eyes began to drift closed, her breathing becoming shallow. "I am ready now," she whispered, "ready to go home again." "We love you, Mama," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "I love you all," Zelda replied. "So much. But your father is waiting for me, and I have been waiting for him for so long. Take care of each other. Remember that love is worth any hardship, any struggle. It was true for your father and me, and it will be true for you." As the snow continued to fall outside, Zelda Xavier took her last breath, a peaceful smile on her face. Her children wept, holding each other, grieving the loss of the woman who had been their foundation, their rock, their example of strength and love. They buried her next to Jacob on the hill, their graves side by side, overlooking the ranch they had built together. The joint gravestone read, "Jacob and Zelda Xavier, together forever." The years continued to turn, but the legacy Jacob and Zelda built endured. Their children ran the ranch with the same dedication and integrity their parents had shown. Their grandchildren grew up hearing stories of the mail-order bride who walked through a blizzard and the cowboy who saved her, of the love that grew between them and sustained them through decades of hardship and joy. The ranch itself prospered into the modern era, managed by successive generations of Xaviers, each one honoring the foundation their ancestors had laid. The original cabin that Jacob had built in 1875, where Zelda had nearly died on that cold December night in 1878, was preserved and maintained, becoming a treasured family landmark. On winter nights when the snow fell thick and silent, it was said you could sometimes feel the presence of Jacob and Zelda on the hill where they were buried, standing together as they had so many times in life, looking down at the legacy of love they had created. Their story became local legend, told and retold, a reminder that love can bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, that courage can lead to extraordinary blessings, and that sometimes walking through a blizzard leads you exactly where you need to be. And so the story ends, not with sorrow but with celebration of a love that conquered all obstacles, a partnership that built something lasting, and two souls who found in each other everything they had been searching for. Jacob and Zelda Xavier lived, loved, and left behind a legacy that would endure for generations. Proof that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the simplest words. You are already home.